once more, welcome to this Preparing Future Faculty event on the critical quality of life question of balancing our work responsibilities and our family responsibilities. We have with us today Dr. Deborah Major, just to give you these, who is a professor in psychology and has been doing work in this area for quite a while. We'll then have a panel discussion of three faculty who have been on the front line in terms of coping with this issue. Wee Youssef, who's an assistant professor in urban studies and public administration. Andrew Gordis, who is an associate professor in foreign languages and literature, I believe in Spanish. And Shauna Prevish, who's an associate professor in educational foundations and leadership. Just before I turn the podium over to Dr. Major, let me just tell you that the spring events will be, I didn't bring the dates with me specifically, but early in February we'll have an event on grant writing, which has been a very popular event. And then later we're going to kind of reprise one on Published Old Parish with a particular focus on kind of the online publication and the issues all around kind of technology and that in our lives. One last announcement: if you are working on the certificate, be aware that the deadline for fall to submit things to me is the first Monday in December, so get those in if you've been working on it and want to go ahead and get that. I have some good news surrounding that. Those of you who have been working on the certificate, we just now have gotten approval to list the completion of the PFF certificate on your transcript. So it will be listed with the RCR, the Responsible Conduct of Research. They put your completion of that at the top. There will also be a notation if you've completed the PFF certificate. So that's something that we're really glad to be able to do for those of you who decide to do that. All right, with that as announcements, let me turn the agenda over to Dr. Major.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Debbie Major. The title of my talk is Finding Work-Family Balance, Lessons from the Research Literature. So when Elaine approached me about this talk, she asked me to bring to you some of the key findings from the work-family research agenda. And I went about this with the help of Mike Latano, my doctoral student, and we focused on two things. One is the most robust or consistent findings that we see regarding work-family balance, and the other were studies that specifically focused on academic samples. Okay, so what you're seeing here is a result of those combined efforts. I promise I'll stop walking in front of this and I'll stay still for you back there. Let's see, the other side. Okay, so this is just an overview of the main pieces of the presentation that I want to share with you today. We're going to talk about what balance is, and also the other side, what conflict is and what contributes to that. And then most importantly, what can you do to achieve some work-family balance for yourself? And as you go on the job market and look for your first career opportunities post-PhD, how can you best assess those opportunities for balance? So that's where the presentation is headed. Let's start with defining balance. And I have to start by telling you, this is something of a misnomer. You see the scale there on the slide. And when we talk about balance, it suggests this idea of equal weighting, equal investment. That's not really what we find when we study work-family balance. What we find instead is that this is very much an individual perception, an individual choice about what feels like balance to us. So for some folks, balance is going to be more investment in career and work and less investment in family or home life. For others, that's going to be the reverse. It feels more balanced to be more invested in home life or personal life than in work. The issue is you need to know where this spot is for you, and then also recognize that it's likely to change over the course of your life. The biggest change we see is when people go from having no children to having children. So if you're more work invested pre-children, you tend to be more home invested post-children. So just keep in mind that what we're talking about with balance isn't equal investment. Instead, what we're talking about is the opportunity for you to find a match. Are you in a career? Are you in a position that allows you to have the investment that you want? Folks, we've got some extra seats. You're not going to disturb me at all if you come forward and find them. So I don't want you to have to stand in the back the whole time for sure. I see a seat here in the second row. Looks like we might need more chairs. Okay. All right. I'm going to keep going. So, on the other side of balance, we have conflict. And conflict between work and family is defined as the circumstance when the expectations or the demands in one sphere or one domain conflict with or make it impossible to meet the demands or the expectations in the other sphere. So we recognize right away that work can interfere with family life, and family life or home life can also interfere with work. And we apply those two different labels. What I'm showing you here on this slide is data from the academic research scientist literature. It's a recent study just done in 2011 that asked people, are you experiencing conflict? Does work interfere with family? Does family interfere with work? And you see that over 75% of academic who are research oriented said, yeah, work is interfering with my family life. There's conflict there. Expectations for my work and career make it hard to meet expectations in my personal life. And nearly 55% say the same thing about family interfering with work. So these are the percentage of folks who said that they're experiencing some or great conflict or interference between these domains. I don't put this here to dishearten you. I just want to convey that it's to be expected. This is something that we're really going to have to deal with and that you have to actively manage. Okay, so where does the conflict tend to come from? And here's where I'm going to share those robust research findings with you. When work interferes with family, the biggest culprit tends to be work hours. How many hours a week are you devoting to work? When it's a lot, there's greater conflict. When we think about family interfering with work expectations, the biggest contributor we see there is having children, especially young preschool age children. So that's the group that's reporting they're having the most family interferences during work. So let's turn to what do we do about it? What does the research literature say works? What's effective for finding this balance, this individualized balance that we want? I'm going to be covering 4 topics. I just put them here so you can see where I'm going. Flexibility, family-friendly program and policies, supportive relationships, and negotiating latitude. We'd see these as the 4 keys, the things that there are actually research evidence about that these work. So let's start with flexibility. When you think about creating flexibility for yourself, there are 2 main ways to think about it: the when and the where. When are you working and where are you working? So if you have flexibility in terms of time in an academic environment, that means, are you getting to set your own teaching schedule? Are you the one picking the days that you teach, the hours that you teach? Okay? When you're thinking about place, think about what the expectations are for being present. Okay? An academic career can be, the good news is that we can have one of the most flexible jobs there is, as long as that flexibility doesn't get defined away for us. So in terms of flex place, surely you're expected to show up for your office hours, to come to meetings and to teach. But beyond that, is it your decision whether you work from your office, from your lab, from home, from the library, or is there an expectation that you're going to be present in your office on a 9-to-5 schedule? That's key in thinking about flexibility. Telework is becoming just commonplace. Telework means working remotely using technology to stay connected. So if you're working from home and using the computer and checking email, you're teleworking, okay? And it's great for helping us find flexibility. But I want to give a caution because we're not all the same in terms of our tolerance for teleworking, for blending those boundaries. So when you do something like work from home, for instance, what you're doing is taking your family and your work domains and integrating them. And for some of us, that works great. We can be at the office and we can handle calls from our kids, and it's no problem. We can work from home, and the stuff going on around our house, like maybe those dirty dishes in the sink, that doesn't distract us or bother us at all. But for some folks, that blurring of the boundaries is problematic, and they find that they're much more effective when they can stay segmented. So when we're talking about flexibility, what you really want is the flexibility to work it out in a way that fits best for you. Back to this sort of individualized idea of balance. But think about using this. Think about flexible time, flexible place, and then telework and how that might be combined to work for you. Okay, so Mike found this nice Dilbert cartoon, and I'll let you read it. I won't read it to you. But it sort of communicates the idea behind FaceTime. And I guess I've been very fortunate at ODU that we have a department and a department chair who trusts us that we're getting our work done, even when we aren't in the office. But I do have colleagues at other institutions who have a boss like Dilbert's, where the expectation is if you're not in class, then you're in your office. Because if you're not here, and if I can't see you and students don't see that you're in your office, that means you're not working. That takes away a lot of flexibility. So unless you're a person who really wants a work schedule that means working at the office, you want to avoid that situation. If it works for you, then it's okay. But FaceTime can be a priority even in academia. There can be expectations that, gosh, unless we see you, we're not sure you're working. Okay, so I said there were 4 keys to developing balance. One was flexibility. The second area we see are policies and programs. And you would think that this would be straightforward, that when an institution, an academic institution, has leave policies, child care policies, when they're willing to stop the tenure clock for major life events, that's a good thing. However, it's a little more complicated than that. What the research shows is that the mere existence of these policies at an organization is not enough to help people reduce their conflict. What we often find are some major obstacles to actually using these policies effective. The first one is knowing that they exist. A surprising number of organizations have policies on the books that would help people balance work and family life, but they're not publicized. No one knows about them. You have to dig through the faculty handbook to find them, or to talk to somebody in HR, because they're just not well known. And that's common. The second is, even when the policies are known, there can be some hesitation about using them. People are often fearful that there will be career repercussions of using a family-friendly policy. That, for instance, if I stop my tenure clock, will people see me as less serious about my career? And this is not a concern that we can just easily dismiss. It can be a legitimate concern. So you want to be in a place where you see department chairs and colleagues encouraging the use. Not only are they knowledgeable about the policies, they encourage the use of such policies. Okay. The third factor in finding balance are supportive relationships. So I've just described the importance of supportive relationships when it comes to using the family-friendly policies that exist at an institution. Those relationships are important. I would argue that they're even more important when such policies don't exist. And oftentimes, they don't. Okay? So when there are no specific policies about leave, what happens for maternity or paternity leave? What if you're adopting a child? When that has to be negotiated on an individual basis, knowing that you're dealing with someone who is supportive is even more important. Okay, so especially looking to the department chair to be supportive. In the research literature, having a supportive supervisor has a large effect on the level of conflict reported. So the more supportive the supervisor, the less conflict. The same is true, but to a lesser effect, a smaller effect size, for coworkers or colleagues. I mean, think about it. These are the folks who are setting the norms in your department. And when they're supportive and encouraging about your efforts to find balance, that makes it much easier to do than if you're running into obstacles and you're getting disapproval. Because these are also the folks voting on your tenure, right? So you're going to be reluctant to do certain things unless you feel like there's support for that. And then finally, the support isn't only from the work domain. Support from our personal life makes a huge difference in finding balance. So common sources of support are family, friends, community networks. That might be church for some people, might be the broader community, it might be the university community. But having resources, having people who give you advice, having people who help you with instrumental kinds of things. You can't pick up your kids and go to take them to soccer, but somebody else can. Those things make a big difference in finding balance. Okay, and then the final key is having negotiating latitude. What this means is having the ability to craft a role that's going to give you the kind of balance that you're looking for. So think about this. When you go out on the market and you're looking for that first job, are you getting messages like, you're going to have a reduced load and we're going to limit the number of new preps you get? Or are the messages, gee, we have, three classes we want taught, and guess who's going to do it? You. And oh, by the way, they're all night classes and they're on Saturday. So that says no negotiating latitude. And it's not only important up front, but as you talk to people, do you see that this evolves? Do you see the opportunity to change and grow in your role as your needs change? So not just the upfront negotiation, but is it a place where you can negotiate over time to maintain balance? What we find is that when people can create their own kind of deal, they're much more satisfied and report a much greater sense of balance than when they feel like it's imposed on them. All right, so let's talk in more detail about how do we actually apply what I'm talking about. I think if you want to factor in the search for balance as you go out on the market, you have to be prepared to engage in 3 assessments. An assessment of self, the institutions you're considering, and then the specific departments where you would be working. Let's start with your self-assessment. What's your ideal? What would you like to have for yourself right now? Do you want lots of opportunities for growth and development, to make a name for yourself? Do you want to ease into it? Think about what you would really like, and then also how that might change for you in the short and long term. And for folks pursuing academic careers, the short term is really that tenure clock window. What are your family plans during that time? Do you already have children? Do you think you will have children during that time? Because that's something that you need to know going in, and it'll drive the kinds of questions you ask of the institution and the department as you're looking for your first position. Okay, the institutional assessment. How do you get a sense of what the work-family culture is like in a particular university? The first place I would advise you to go is the website. That's the public face. That's what the university is putting out there for public consumption. When you look at the website, do you see anything that speaks of family friendliness to you? When you go to the faculty pages, do you see discussions of quality of work life? Do you see policies and programs that support family? Other places to look would be the faculty handbook. Are those issues addressed in the faculty handbook? You can talk to human resources and see what they know and what they share about family-friendly policies. Pay attention to how difficult this information is to find. If you have to do a lot of digging, if no one seems to know, if one person refers you to the next person, that suggests this isn't a big priority at the institution. Okay? Okay, and then so finally, the individual department at the university. When you're engaging in the interview process, you're on the phone interview. Do topics related to this issue come up? Especially when you're on site. Do people talk about opportunities for balance? What are you hearing in the hallways? If people aren't bringing it up to you, you need to look for opportunities to bring it up in a way that it's relevant to you. So talk to the chair about it. Talk to faculty, not just at the junior level, but at the levels you hope to achieve, the higher levels with more seniority. And then I also think graduate students are a good source of information. I bet I could poll any of you right now about what's work-family balance like in your departments. And you could tell me, because you're there. You're participant observers in the department. You see what the other faculty do. You know if they're expected to be in their offices all day long or if they have flexibility. So talking to graduate students at the place you're considering going would be a good idea. And then pay attention when you're there. You know, what are you seeing about the norms? What are you observing is expected? Okay, so where have we been? We've talked about defining your own personal balance and how this is an individual definition and not an equal definition. We've talked about the importance of different resources, how you can look for flex time, flex place, indicators of a strong work-family culture, the support you might need from work colleagues and from people in your personal life. We've talked about policies and programs, feeling free to take advantage of them and wanting to be a place that both has the policies and encourages you to use them. And what we're hoping is that if you follow these things and take these best practices from the literature, then you'll find the balance you're looking for. Thank you.
To start then, I am going to just ask each of our panelists to briefly introduce themselves and their kind of balancing situation. And Shauna, do you want to start us off?
Sure. I'm Shauna Pribish. I'm in the Educational Foundations and Leadership Program. I'm so excited to see so many people here, especially some of my former students, my current students. You're crazy now. And I also temper this with, I insanely love ODU. So what I will tell you about my experience here, take that with that grain of salt that I am in love with this university. So that's, and I have an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old, and I just made tenure about a year ago. It can be done.
I'm Andrew Gordis. I'm in foreign languages, and I have to say that I really like ODU as well as a place to work. I think in terms of finding balance, I think it's an institution that both in my department and I'd say as far as the university really does help a lot. And this type of profession I think really helps, at least from my perspective, in terms of balancing family and work, because we have a lot of flexibility in terms of where we can work and when we can work, those kind of things.
Your kids? How many kids?
Oh, yeah, I have
kids?
3. Let me see, they're currently 4, 8, and 10.
Hi, I'm Wee Youssef. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Urban Studies and Public Administration. And I have a 4.5-year-old. I have to say 4.5 because he gets very insulted. He's 4.5. And we have another one on the way. So one of the things that I'll talk about is how it's constantly changing and you constantly have to think about new strategies for how you're going to deal with the work-life balance issue, because, boy, you're constantly dealing with new and different things. But in terms of kind of my situation, moved here to start my career at ODU, and new baby, new job, husband who was unemployed, new city, new house. So, I can tell you all about making that big transition and striking that balance from being the student to now being the primary breadwinner. Mm-hmm. And now having people dependent on me. It was a big transition, so I'll share some of that with you.
I'm Debbie Major. I think I'm one of those people who likes ODU too. I've spent my entire 20-year career here. When I came in 1992, I was single and did not have children. In the ensuing 20 years, I got married, I had a baby, I got divorced. I'm a single mother now of a 13-year-old. So I've experienced a lot of different phases of work and family balance.
Well, it sounds like ODU is pretty responsive in the fact that we've had several faculty say it's a good place to work. But I'm sure you experience challenges, and you also might want to address kind of how do you manage to select ODU in terms of, was that part of why you came here? And are there challenges at some other universities that people might interview at or consider going that would be kind of red flags? I don't have any particular order here.
Well, I can jump in mostly because I'm pushy. Is that I think ODU continues to evolve in terms of its work policies, work-family balance policies. So when I came to interview here, I just had a baby 2 weeks prior. And there were no mechanisms set up during my interview because I didn't really think about taking time to breastfeed or breast pump and resting and things like that. So, and they didn't have mechanisms for that. So it was kind of awkward, like I really need to go to the bathroom now, that kind of stuff. And they also, when I had a second child, I was the first person in my college to ever attempt to stop the clock due to pregnancy. So that pressure about, yes, the policies are on the books, but using them was very real for me. And I decided, what the hell, I'm going to do it. And if I don't get tenure because I was pregnant and stopped the clock, then I don't want to work here anyway. So I did it. It was fine. And now the path is made for people in my college to stop the clock. And it's not expected. In some places, they automatically stop the clock. And they do for men also. We're not there yet here at ODU. So there are, but you can ask those questions when you go to, there's always a risk when you're in an interview, like, so how soon can I stop the clock? And they're like, don't lead off with that one. But, I noticed you have children. Did you stop the clock? Did they stop the clock for men also?
I believe they do. I think I've heard of somebody in another department. I didn't take advantage of that particular, and neither did my wife. She also works here, which I think it's something to consider, because often graduate students meet in graduate school, and they come out and they're both looking for jobs. And I know as somebody, you often hear kind of horror stories where one spouse lands a job in one city and another in another city, and they're not necessarily close. But my wife and I were fortunate that initially she started working here first. I found another job close by, and then eventually I was able to get on in a position here as well. And some universities actually do have spousal hire programs. I don't believe they do here at ODU, but the sense that I've gotten is that they're very supportive of that type of thing, but I don't know that there's a specific policy in place for that. So that can be a challenge for those people who find themselves in that situation. Let's see, what else
Well, going back to Elaine's original question about kind of, thinking about where to go, I had a few offers when I was considering, and I actually, recognizing that I got married very young, and so to me this was a decision not to be made just by myself. So we actually sat down and said, okay, these are all the places that are hiring. Where are we going to apply? So we picked 5 places. And even then we were thinking about work life, because my husband's a big outdoors person, and so we said, okay, upstate New York, the Adirondacks, we can do that. Oh yeah, Old Dominion, the beach, we can do that. Vermont, we can go skiing. So everything kind of revolved around the outside life, not just what was going to happen at the university. So that kind of drove, first of all, where we were going to apply, and then once we had these offers, it was like, okay, well, then it was still, what's the weather like? What's the community like? It wasn't, I really, to us, we weren't really thinking much about the university. And so, it could have been another university in a really nice beach area, but it was the beach that, my husband's a beach volleyball player, so he was like, yeah, the beach, that's where we're going to go, and here we are. So a lot of it was the life part that was driving the decisions, not necessarily the work. I kind of figured, it's a job.
Well, and I think it always enters in. I remember when I was on the market, my husband worked in food. My one criteria is it had to have a lot of restaurants, a lot of nice places that he could go to look for a job. And so I interviewed in Tallahassee. They had one restaurant. So those are things to think about, especially if you have a partner or a spouse or whatever. So.
It's been a long time for me since I was making that initial decision, but I think what I was more focused on as a single person who didn't have children was lifestyle. I wanted to be in a place where not only could I be productive and successful in my career, but in a location where I felt there were good opportunities to enjoy myself. So that was a big driver in choosing ODU. I still think of like this Norfolk area as a place that has a lot of the bigger city amenities and opportunities for entertainment without being a big city itself. And that's been a very good decision for me. So, I love sports and I love theater, and I get to have season tickets to a lot of things that I enjoy, and I feel like I've taken advantage of that. So thinking about my personal life was a good fit. I probably didn't give very concrete thought to how my life might change. As somebody who was doing research in work and family, I knew to ask some questions about, do you have maternity leave? And at the time there was no maternity leave policy. And that was frankly a red flag for me. I felt better because at the time they were getting on-site childcare. It was like a hard-fought battle to get that here at ODU, and they had just accomplished it. So I got, the message that it was an evolving place, and I'm hearing that it continues to do that.
Let me stop and ask if anyone in the audience has a question. Hold on just a second.
Let me remind you, since I'm on my way here, to be sure you sign the attendance sheet and to fill out our evaluations before you leave.
I'm in psychology and my fiance is in physics, and I was wondering if you all have found that there are certain departments that are better at this than other departments, or is it sort of a university-wide sort of thing?
My experience, because I have colleagues all over the country in all different departments, is it's really that leadership in the department. Because I thought, I'm in a college of education. There's going to be kids all over the place. Well, we have a strong policy that you can't bring your kids to work. And I have been written up twice for that. Yeah, under a former leadership that was much more stringent about that. Of course, I flout it all the time. But it's really about the leadership, and if they're supportive of having policies, what you're doing, your work. Ultimately, if they want you to be happy, and your work life has to be in balance with your family life for you to be happy. So right now I have a chair that his kids are constantly a topic of conversation. I mean, to me, it's a signal that it's okay for he's supporting his life, I'm supporting my life, and we are so much happier. Everybody is.
Yeah, I would kind of just say that it's probably depends on the department. Departments can have their own character, and they can vary, I think, quite differently in terms of how they view, family work issues. Our department's very nice in that, and I think it's not just a work-family type issue, but everybody kind of has the attitude that, we're very independent, and everybody kind of works in their particular field, make sure they're teaching their classes, doing their research, attending to whatever service obligations that you have, and whatever you do outside of that, however you get your work done, people are very, open to that. And as far as, I've had my kids come to my office on, work schedule doesn't always fit with school schedule, or when somebody gets sick, they might spend an hour or two in my office while I teach. And so, it probably, and nobody bats an eye. If they see them, look how big they're getting. So everybody, obviously the sense in our department is that they're very open to that, and they're very encouraging. And everybody seems to realize that people have lives outside of work, and so there's a general recognition. I would imagine, too, that type of culture is also changing as society kind of changes. There may be people who come from more traditional backgrounds who make that kind of rigid separation, but I think people on the whole, where you have two-income families, that everybody realizes that's a balance you have to maintain, and it's not realistic, I think, to make that separation.
Okay, we have someone here who'd like to comment.
I'd like to share something with you for all of your PhD students, especially girls. I defended my PhD. I was almost 9 months pregnant, and when I started work, I was 3 weeks after my delivery C-section. And I talked with my department chair, and they let me come to my office for 7 months. And you can just talk to your department chair, and one of the perks working for universities, you can shut the door, and it comes a little bit, you can say something else. Less noisy comes. I just want to share that. So don't be scared to ask.
I have a question. I guess this is a different aspect of the whole family thing, but I'm in undergrad and I've had student loans, and I'm in grad school, but I have a family to support. And my main issue is going to be money, as a man. It's going to be money. But did ODU do anything like support with student loans, or was it the pay that attracted any of you to ODU, or was it just strictly the environment?
Rolling.
There was a time when you did like cheap houses and paid off student loans at one time.
For a rock star, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, for someone like me, you don't go to the humanities for the pay, but it obviously depends on the field. Some fields pay much better than obviously the humanities. Usually, if you can work outside the university in some sort of high-paying field, they have to pay you more here. But in terms of, I think the thing that is attractive as somebody with a family working in academia is the flexibility that you get. You may not make as much money, but you're not required, I think for most people to be there 8 hours a day, 9 to 5. And I have flexibility in terms of when I schedule my classes. My wife teaches Monday, Wednesday. I teach Tuesday, Thursday. So if something comes up, one of us can take care of it without it interfering with our classes, or kids are out. So, and then when I work, I don't have to work necessarily during those hours. If I have something in the middle of the day, I can get to whatever it is that I had to put off much later. So, that's an attractive part of the lifestyle, I guess, of being a professor. And then obviously the summers are even more flexible in terms of what you want to do.
And it would allow you to save on childcare, I presume.
It can. Although if you really want to get work done when the kids are home, you don't get so much done. So.
But related to the specific question you asked about money and loan repayment, some disciplines have federal loan repayment and loan deferral programs, and you can work with your university to get set up with that. So for instance, National Institute of Health has a program like that. In terms of negotiating for the best salary you can get, the better informed you are, the better you're going to do with that. So looking at all the resources you can for what's average in your field, how that varies based on geography, and knowing those numbers going in will be really important. I remember when I was negotiating salary for my job, not all of psychology is really the same. We have sub-disciplines in psychology, and I'm fortunate to be in one that's higher paying. And I was able to say, look, this is what people in my discipline make. Here are concrete offers from other institutions. So ODU ended up raising its offer to meet that. But if I hadn't had those things, I think it would have been a much lower salary.
So as far as a strategy for graduate students negotiating, one of the things I think they would need to do is know what their discipline and their area kind of can bear.
And like Andrew, in our lifestyle, we constantly battle, because I made a lot more money before I came back to graduate school and became a professor. But I have to sometimes sit down and say that my time is my money, and I'm paying myself with my time. So I've chosen a lower dollar value career, but I can walk my kids to school, and I can pick them up from school. And I teach from 7 to 10 at night, but if they get sick, it's not a burden. But if I put that in dollar value, I'm making as much as I would have been making in the private sector. I'm happier too.
Yeah, I would agree here. Yeah, I would say the same thing.
It sucks when I want a bigger house. Right? Like my flexibility doesn't buy me a bigger house, but I'm happier.
I look at I have a brother and his wife. They're kind of type A personalities, live in Washington D.C. and I see the kind of things, the challenges that I have, and I do not know how they do with 2 kids. The same type of thing, 2 little kids at this point. And I think they're kind of, once they started having kids, they realized that. Some of the challenges that I was having, as somebody, but they do it working, 9-10 hour days a week. They get home at like 7 o'clock at night, and to me, it just seems incredible. I'm like, yeah, I don't make as much money as they do, but I think I like my situation better.
Another point related to the financial resources are policies that affect other earnings. So for instance, what's the university's policy about consulting? Because many of us are in fields where you can be a consultant. Does the university allow for that? And if they do, how much? And what's the process for being able to do that? Same thing for if you bring in grants, whether they're education or research related grants. If you bring grants into the university, what percentage of that can be salary for you? What's the university's policy on that? So knowing that too, and if that needs to be negotiated, being prepared to do that can be important.
Yeah, and just I'm part of the faculty senate, so be aware that policies on those kinds of things particularly differ widely across different universities. So you really need to either get on the website or ask some pretty pointed questions, especially if you are a researcher and what's called indirect funds, you know, whether it comes back to you, what percentage of it comes back to you, because it all doesn't. And can you use it to support your salary or only for equipment, and you know, really depending on what your career goals are and what you see yourself doing in the next 10 years or more, you need to make sure that the university is a good fit for you. Any other questions from the audience? Yes. Hold on. Let's get to it, if you will.
I was just wondering, as far as like family members who become ill and you become the caregiver for them, what have been your experiences or experiences of your colleagues in regards to how the university deals with that?
I can tell you, it sounds like my life's a disaster. I'm a very happy person. We have Family Medical Leave Act here, and one thing I found is that your experience as a graduate student is vastly different from what you have accessible as a faculty member oftentimes, and that differs by institution. So when I was pregnant and my graduate student was pregnant, the things that were available to me as a faculty member were not available to her, and I thought that was grossly unfair. But I think what's available to you as a faculty member is Family Medical Leave Act. So that's 12 weeks of unpaid. Mm-hmm. But before you go there, talk with your chair about what can we do. Can I shift my load from a 2-2 to a 1-3 or a 0-4 because I need time now. So my mother had 2 strokes this summer. I just had to work it out where I could be at the hospital until she got stabilized, and that I didn't do any Family Medical Leave Act. It was all juggling. Colleagues, can you cover a class here? I will cover a class for you there, that kind of stuff. But I knew I had 12 weeks in the bag if I needed to take advantage of it.
And everybody has that.
Yes.
It's a federal law. So that's the minimum that everyone will have regardless of where you go, is the 12 weeks of unpaid leave that covers maternity, but it also covers illness for yourself or family members. It's nice if you can see what the university offers beyond that, if there are any formal policies about leave, but negotiating with the chair and handling it internally is going to be a pretty big norm.
But also in the same way that you can stop the tenure clock for pregnancy or other life-changing kind of events, you could also, if you have to care for an elderly parent or, there's a major sickness in the family, you can also stop the tenure clock or request to stop the tenure clock due to those circumstances.
I'll just say you can't stop the tenure clock afterwards. So we had a faculty member whose husband had cancer, and she thought about, should I stop the tenure clock? But you're in the middle of this crisis, right? And you don't know, how bad is this crisis going to be? I don't know what I should do. She didn't stop the tenure clock, and of course it's dragged on and on and on. So when in doubt, think, how bad is this going to be? It's going to be really bad, probably. So start having those conversations as soon as you think, should I do that? Because you're not going to lose anything. Mm-hmm. Versus when she got to the other end, lost a complete year taking care of her husband. It's like, oh, I should have stopped the tenure clock. Too late.
Because if you stop it and you find everything turned out, you can always go up early.
Right. Exactly.
And in the same way with pregnancy, there's a time window that you can request to stop the clock.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be for a year. Right.
I was just going to ask if anybody could speak about when you don't have policies in place and there's ambiguity about that, and you have advisors. Let's say the FaceTime example you used earlier, and there's an understanding that you don't need to be in your office, but then later that changes, and how you might deal with the ambiguity of not having a policy in place and your advisor changing or your supervisor changing their view on it as you go.
Well, I can speak to that a little bit, primarily kind of remembering when I was a grad student. in a lot of cases, a lot of these policies aren't going to be concrete, written down policies that you can always refer to. So, you talk to other students and they, oh, well, my advisor doesn't really care, and my advisor had never cared when I was a grad student, and even in my current department, my department chair doesn't really care. But it really is interesting because when I was a grad student, all of a sudden, while my advisor didn't care if I came in, our graduate program director all of a sudden issued a directive that we had to post our office hours and we had to be there, and she spot checked us. I felt like I was in first grade. And so at that point it's a lot harder. And so what I ended up doing was talking to my advisor, and he says, well, I really don't care when the work gets done, as long as it gets done. At that point I was kind of I was employed across 2 departments. I was actually working full time, 40 hours a week, and doing my PhD program full time. And so I just couldn't do I'm going to be in my office in this building from this time period and in this building this time period. So he says, don't worry about it. If she complains and makes a big deal, I'm at the end of the semester, I do your performance evaluations. It's not going to be an issue. But again, it's something that if it's an issue, you do have to talk to the advisor about or with someone who has kind of influence with regards to that particular issue.
Now, the year before you go up for tenure, you want to be at everything, right? I swear, you want your face everywhere, and you don't want someone to say, "I don't have no idea who that person is," right? So that's an unwritten policy too, is just to be around.
Why do you think I'm here? I'm going up for tenure next year.
It just comes back to the family medical leave act. You need some time working for the university to have that benefit. It's not from day zero. As I said, I had my kid 3 weeks before I started working at the university, and I didn't have that because I had to start working immediately. Because what might happen, you might have a kid in between jobs, or while you at the previous university. So what is at the ODU? How many time do you have to work to have the benefit, the family leave act? Somewhere it's a year.
Someone who knows, I think.
Yeah, that's something we have to be careful.
You have to be employed for 12 consecutive months before medical leave.
Okay, so it's 1 year, 12 months.
My question is, how receptive are departments when you first get hired about starting a family? Because I'm in that age range where 30, 35, I might think, well, I don't have any plans right now, but I don't want to go in and say I'm thinking about it, and they're not receptive. So I was wondering what your experiences are.
Well, when I interviewed at ODU, I was 6 months pregnant. I wasn't showing, which is kind of interesting. But they can't ask you questions about well, yeah, technically they're not supposed to. And so the issue never quite came up. But I will tell you, as part of a faculty search committee, we had a search, and someone came in and she was pregnant, and the issue came, well, this is, how is this, does this change our expectations? And so to me that was an interesting conversation to have in a faculty committee. Because first of all, I was like, well, we're not supposed to ask her that she's pregnant. And I'm not sure that should really kind of factor into the consideration. But I think sometimes it's hard to separate what are the implications of this, with how are this person going to fit within the department. So I'm not going to say that they're not receptive, because I've had no problems. I bring my kid in all the time. If you're ever in Constant Hall and you see this 4.5-year-old really loud, that's my kid. I bring him in all the time. And I'm also in a department where, I'm in public administration, so, public service is part of the expectation of the faculty member. Beyond the research and the teaching, we have to do public service. And so Keegan, who's my 4.5-year-old, he goes to Monarch Service Days. He goes to Relay for Life. He does all of these events on campus. And so it's not like they're not receptive to it. I just think sometimes there's a unconscious, you can't quite truly separate, okay, so the person's going to have a baby, or they're thinking about having a baby. What does that mean for us as a department?
And just an aside here, that's one reason equal opportunity and affirmative action really puts a lot of emphasis on evaluating candidates on the basis of the ad and whether you can do the job. So technically, you're right. It's not supposed to enter into that decision at all. But human beings, who they are, there are probably, influences.
I think it might also depend too on what the expectations are for the position. My sense is that maybe at a place where there's a high expectation for research, and there may be people there who are thinking you're really supposed to be working hard. Other places they may have a little more relaxed, may not have as high of expectations for that. Some are more focused on teaching. It may depend on where you're going and what the expectations are for the position in terms of the mindset of the people. And just kind of the general, you might kind of keep your ears open in terms of what their attitudes are. Do the other people, if you go in for an interview or do they talk about their families? Do they talk about what's going on in their lives outside of the job, the school? When people are open about those types of things, it's in some ways it's an invitation to be open about it as well, or that atmosphere kind of reigns there, as opposed to people who are very serious and very focused on their careers may have that expectation for you as well, as you come in.
I have two questions. My first question is, what is really the difference between, I understand the difference between your rank in terms of assistant professor, associate professor, but what is that, how does that translate into work balance? and how does that, the Holy Grail seems to be tenure. So what is it, does work balance become, I got all this time now because I don't have to do all this stuff? Or, what does that really look like in terms of that work?
So Andrew, you and I do the happy dance
Yeah.
while Wade is crying.
Yeah, they're about to burst my bubble here.
So assistant professors don't have tenure. Associate most often have rank of tenure or have tenure. And then full, of course, is the cherry on the top of the tenured professor. So what it means is that you are, as an assistant, working your butt off and trying to establish a research agenda, get to know a university, get your face out there, the whole thing. And so it's your high stress time. And then post, if you, we just got tenure, so all of a sudden we're like this, oh, thank dear God, right? It's a lot easier to keep work and life in balance when you're not afraid of losing your job. And that's the reality of it, is that there's that constant question, am I good enough to get tenure? And will I lose my job? And that makes it really hard to reach balance.
Yeah, I think that's the most challenging point at which to maintain balance. But it's interesting, as you move up the ranks, the work expectations change. So I noticed, for instance, when I went from associate professor to full professor, all of a sudden university level committees and college level committees that I had never paid attention to before, I'm suddenly being tapped to serve on those. So the issue of having to manage it, I don't think ever goes away. It'll be different, and it'll evolve as your career evolves and as your personal life evolves. But I would absolutely agree that pre-tenure period is the most stressful, mainly because we're human beings and it's uncertain. We find uncertainty stressful. We don't know that we're going to get tenure, and it's an up or out decision. After tenure, you'll continue to get evaluated, but you're not going to lose your job over that evaluation. So it's a huge difference.
Yeah, I just want to add something to what she asked. The girl that asked the previous question, not you, I just want to say, don't be scared to have kids. In my department, we have 2 assistant professors who have toddlers. Mine is 22 months, and she has the one that's 9 months old. And we're both in tenure track. It's research position. And in my opinion, because I used to teach in teaching institution, when you're in a research position, you have more flexible schedule because you basically teach less. So, you can work from computer, the door's shut, as I said previously. So, don't think that. And when you have a kid, it's a huge motivation to succeed and excel. So it gives you some extra boost, this tenure thing that they were talking about.
Yes, I'm Gianluca De Leo, National Faculty at ODU, and I recently received tenure. And I can tell you that if you guys think that you are going to be busy during the tenure process, once you get tenure, you even get busier. That's what happened to me.
Crushing blows.
Busier and more frustrated with meetings and committee and whatever is coming down from your chair. So I feel that I'm actually busier now than what I was busier in doing my tenure track. At least I'm busier in doing things that I don't like so much. I used to do when I was doing my tenure track. But my wife and I made recently this rule, and the rule is no work talk from 5 to 10:30. So now when I get home, I close my computer and I turn off my iPhone. And she does the same, so we do not have email, text message, or anything that is work related. Then at 10:30, I turn on my computer again, and I answer, 20 emails from my freshman class. But and I see that they deserve, me to answer them even at 10:30. But we have this no work related talk that I think that is great if you want to maintain a relationship after you get tenure.
Thank you.
I have a question, and maybe some of you can speak to this. If you are sitting on a search committee and you're looking to hire a position, and you see young women or young men coming up, is it already in your heads that this is someone that could be having children in a few years? And would it be to the benefit of someone that's interviewing, to be explicit about that if they're in a position where they're not going to want children?
Well, I've been on search committees since I started here, so
Yeah. We're growing.
that's at least 8 search committees.
Yeah.
We, like I said, I had mentioned earlier how I was kind of surprised at how the conversation about having kids and how that might affect that kind of took me by surprise, because to me it just never occurred to me that would even be an issue, because when I actually had never planned on having kids, but so at that stage when I wasn't planning on having kids, there were a lot of other distractions to life that were not kid related, and so I don't see that there's a difference between kid distractions and couple type distractions or single type distractions. And so to me it's never consciously been part of the conversation. I will be the first one to say, oh, you have a kid, how old is he, and all of that. But I don't think in looking at junior faculty coming in, to me it's never been an issue of, oh, are they going to have kids, and what's going to happen after that.
Yeah, I've been on at least one committee, and I don't know that that's necessarily come up, in terms of considering whether they are or aren't going to have kids. I could perhaps imagine if somebody came in pregnant, there might at least be a comment about it. Me personally, I wouldn't see it as necessarily a bad thing. My wife, when she started, I think it was like a few months after that is when we had our second. We had a 1-year-old at the time, and we had our second one in her first year. And she did fine. So I mean, if you're hiring, as far as I see it, if you're hiring somebody who's got the kind of qualifications that you like, it's got the kind of work ethic, that's going to continue whether they have kids or not. So that wouldn't be a disqualifier for me. There may be other people who feel differently, but from my perspective, it wouldn't make a difference.
Well, I think it had to do with how you should present yourself. Mm-hmm. And I would say that focusing on what your personal life is like is not the way to go. What you want to do is present the reasons why you are a good fit for that department and that job, and really focus on that. Because, as I said, technically it's illegal for them to pay attention to anything else. Debbie, did you have a comment?
Yeah,
I agree with what Elaine just said about, from a candidate perspective, that's what you want to emphasize. But I also think that you can have some security in knowing that equal opportunity, or the university's equal opportunity branch, is typically overseeing these searches. So a search committee can't just run wild. And I can tell you from being on many that when you send to equal opportunity, here's our short list, they're going to look at the pool and look at the short list and ask about women and minorities who are in the pool who don't make the short list. So a committee that's operating on explicit or maybe even unintentional implicit biases is going to get called out, because they're actually asked, how is it that this candidate's qualifications don't match the job? And they have to have an answer. And if they don't, the person's on the list. So there's some protections, I think, administratively from the kinds of personal biases that people could have.
I have more of a share, but I welcome your comments if you've had similar situations. I'm a PhD candidate, and I have two boys. One is 2 and one's almost 5. And so I had them through my master's program, and then and I was down at LSU, and then moving to a new area and starting a PhD program right away. And literally had my second one 2 weeks before the fall semester, and I was on assistantship, so I was at school full-time, worked part-time, new baby, second one and all that. And of course my husband changed his job at the same time. So, there's that saying, if you want something done, ask a busy person. And I don't remember how I did it, but I did it.
That's true.
I'm a candidate now. So, and I think that, these distractions or child time or things like Dr. Yusuf said, there are distractions everywhere. And I think that, when you're busy and you go from one thing to the next, and you just don't think about it. So some of these stereotypes are in a way unfounded, and of course if you have the personal support system, husband or wife or whatever that might be, that works. And I remember going into, when I went to our first national conference, and this was as a master's student, but I was already working at LSU full time, so I was also a professional. And I remember people would say, where do you want to go to? I was kind of getting recruited for PhD programs, and some really great ones, and was so flattered. And I remember I went back to my professor who actually got me involved it was the American Society of Public Administration, and she had 2 children. I said, well, how do I answer this question? Because they're asking me just on, kind of general conversation, try to feel me out, I guess. And she said, don't say anything, but then have them, and it'll work out. And I mean, it really did. It's like you don't know how you're going to handle it. You're coming into it, and you're not in a relationship, and you don't have a family. But then I don't know how. I never talked to someone who's been fired for having children and a family. I mean, it works out.
But I think it does make it challenging. And for me, I'm an engineer by training, and so I'm a planner. I like, and I married an engineer, right? Yeah. And so we're both planners. We do not deal well with change. And so that, I think, more than anything, is all of the schedules change. My husband just started, well, he's finishing his coursework, but he's in a PhD program, and we worked it out well so far in advance. I'm going to teach Tuesday, Thursday, and he talked to his advisor, and they're going to offer the class Monday, Wednesday. Then about a week before registration, they change the course schedule. We need a babysitter. All of these. To me, that's the most difficult part. Is because I'm a planner, I like things laid out this far in advance, and I want to know all of this, and I want to know that we have a babysitter lined up for something 3 months later. The fact that the balance is constantly changing is what constantly throws me for the loop. It's just, I think I've got things going. It's the 6th week of the semester, and boom, something happens. Now I'm back to square one, trying to figure out, okay, well, how are we going to do this again? And and who's going to watch the kid?
Well, just one more reaction to that, though. I mean, if we expect flexibility from our employers, then I think we have to be flexible too. Mm-hmm. And I've learned so much about myself and my husband and our relationship, and we're stronger for it. And I know that doesn't always happen. We have all these horror stories of, and maybe there she was in flexibility, I don't know, but so I think it's a give and take all around, and it's constantly being reevaluated.
But it is. You have to understand your personality, and you have to understand your expectations. And knowing that I'm a planner, and knowing that I think like things work, well in advance. I have to work within my comfort zone, and that's what. So to me, that's the biggest. To me, the biggest challenge in that balance is my comfort zone doesn't really allow a lot of uncertainty.
Knowing yourself. Wow.
Yeah. I think the point is well taken, though, that if you wait for the ideal time for some of these things, to have a life, the best time to have children, you can be waiting a long time. So I think there is a need to just live your life too, and trust that you'll be able to figure it out. I know that when I was having a child, I had a lot of anxiety. I felt like I was really busy already. I was concerned that, am I not going to be a good mother because I'm busy at my job, or am I no longer going to be good at my job? And I spent, I think, what was a lot of time needlessly worrying about it, because once I had a child, I figured it out, and it changed me. I went from being a person who worked all the time to being a person who was much more structured about working this time and not working at that time. So it works out.
I guess just to kind of change gears, my husband's active duty in the Navy, and in the Hampton Roads area is saturated as it is with various branches of the military. What are some accommodations you've seen the university or even your department make for faculty members that might be military spouses? And do you have any stories of faculty members that are military spouses and how they've succeeded in academia?
We have several in the College of Education, and one of which is working remotely while she's not on deployment, her husband's on deployment, and that will last 2 years. Others that we just acknowledge, she's very public about when her husband's deployed, and that means if she's going to be cranky, she's going to be cranky. Whether she needs help, she's very public about that also. That's part of it. My father was in the Navy. If you don't reach out for help, you won't get it. So with these two, it just happens to be women that they're very good about saying, this is what's going on, that's half the battle. Again, it's always this informal negotiation, even with your colleagues, like, this semester is not going to be my best semester because husband just left, or better yet, husband coming home, right? So sometimes that's the worst, where you're also in renegotiation because you've been the power and now he's back, right? So just letting him know that that's happening. It's the same for our students, right? I mean, if our students let me know that this is going on, or I'm not going to make this deadline because he's leaving or coming back, or she's leaving and coming back, or we have to find someplace for our children to stay for 6 months because we're both being deployed, all that, just tell us. Yeah.
Several times over the course of this, and you mentioned telework and all of how are things being influenced by the technology? The balancing, because our lives are saturated. Gianluca talked about this most specifically, about how he and his wife are dealing with it. But what are your experiences with the encroachment of technology?
I mean, I was thinking about when he was talking about that, I think it's up to, as a professor, it's kind of up to you to decide, in terms of like emails, because the emails constantly come in for advising and teaching, and to decide, you can just tell people that from this hour to this hour I will be at the computer and I will answer emails, and from this hour to this hour you'll have to wait. Just like, you structure your life according to the way that you want it, and technology is just a way. It's a useful tool because I can work at home just as easily as I can work in the office. But it can also, like you said, it can be very invasive. It can invade that time. And so if you just decide that this is how I want to structure my time, and I don't want any of that interference at this time. Then you can make it that way. Maybe you can't do that as much when you're pre-tenure, and you want to make sure that you're looking like you're very available. But I think most people realize that there's a certain expectation that you have a private life and that you should be able to maintain that. And it's up to each of you to decide how much you want it to interfere or not. How available you want that to be.
I use technology, for example, cell phone. I use that as an excuse. So I've actually been to class where a student comes running in late, and she's like, "I've been sending you emails to let you know that I'm going to be late." And I'm like, "Yeah." I had to drive up from Norfolk. I was teaching in Hampton. I had to come up from Norfolk. I haven't sat down at a computer yet to check your email. And she's like, "You mean you don't have email on your phone?" No. I have a prepaid plan. I have text
earlier note
and I
on
have
money.
phone. That's the reason why I know students have my cell phone number. But my students know that I try to be very good about email, about responding to email. But you're not going to get my cell phone number. I don't think any of the PhD students have my cell phone number either. You're not going to have my cell phone number. You're not going to have my home number.
Well, there are two sides of this. There are not making ourselves available. Okay? There's also the pressure that we can feel that, I've got my laptop at home. I've got this at home. I've got that at home. I've got to tell myself I'm not going to look at the emails, And so, I kind of gather a lot of these issues that the takeaway message is you got to think about it. And you got to make decisions about it rather than just assuming it's only work.
And I think it's really important to actively manage it rather than letting it manage you. Because those emails, they're going to come, and they're going to come in the middle of the night and on the weekend, but you've got to decide what's going to work for you. And that's not just true in our career. I mean, for all career fields, we see that technology is really that double-edged sword. On the one hand, it's great to help us have flexibility, but on the other hand, it really can become a distraction and a driver itself. So you want to avoid that.
I had a question about the email situation. I'm a graduate student, and I was having some time management issues where I used to be the guy who, if anybody emailed me, right away I was emailing them back. But people were saying, you're not getting enough time in the lab. So one day, I decided what I'm going to do is I'm going to check my email once today, and then I'm going to spend the rest of the day in the lab, and I got a ton of work done. And the next day, everybody swore I wasn't at work. And so now I'm trying to figure out what's the proper etiquette for responding to emails, and how do you respond to these emails without using up hours and hours of your day just on a computer?
Some people I know have written policies on their syllabi about they will respond within 2 business days or 3, whatever it is that you want to say. And then, but as you said, like if your habit was only to check once a day, then everyone would think that was normal. So and I only respond to emails that are low, like on my phone, that are low stakes, because I don't see very well. So if you send me a high stakes email and I'm looking at it off hours, not on a big screen, I am not going to respond using my thumbs on something that's important to you. So that's also I don't know how you write that in a policy, but I'm not thumb typing something that could change your life, right? And I also, does that mean that it might be I don't answer it all weekend? Because I also personally, I don't work on weekends. I'm there present with my family on weekends, and but of course I don't include email, like low stakes email, but I really don't work on weekends. Right.
Yeah, I just kind of set my policy that, as a general rule, that, kind of that 9 to 5, I'll answer emails, periodically through the day, not constantly. If I'm working on, a project that needs my undivided attention, we'll wait until I'm done with that, and then maybe I'll take a look at the emails. And then after that, once I'm at home, or I just kind of put those aside, until the next day. And frankly, I really don't get anything that can't wait till the next day, till the next morning. There's nothing considering what I do, I'm not a heart surgeon, so.
That's what I say. It's not brain surgery.
Yeah.
We're not brain surgeons. No one's going to die.
You know.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not that big.
They sound like they are.
Yeah, but they're not.
Right. But you can do some creative things too with the automatic responses you can set up. So let's say that you want to have a lab day and you know that you may be getting some email. You can set up that automatic reply to say, I am working in the lab today. If this is an urgent issue, please come find me, at X place. Otherwise, I thank you for your patience. I'll get back to your email as soon as I can. And that, separate. So you're replying. They're hearing from you. They know what you're doing. You're managing that impression. And if it truly is some emergency that can't wait, they know where to find you.
Again, let me just remind everybody, since a few people are starting to leave, please be sure you sign the attendance sheet if you, especially if you're interested in the certificate. Any other questions?
I was going to share with you
Any
my
last comments from our guys?
I started thinking about this. Is horrible when you're asked to do these and you start thinking about it. And so I have 4 strategies that I use to keep in balance. The first is I acknowledge that I'm not in balance. Right? I do not do it well, and I forgive myself for that. The second is, in order for your work life to be in balance, you have to be in balance. So that means you need a wellness plan. So that means exercising, that means eating right, that means sleeping, right? Going to see a counselor if that's part of what you need, and being efficient. Cook all your meals on the weekend, which is what I do. Do laundry at a laundromat where you can get it all done at once, stuff like that. So embrace efficiency and structure. My third thing, do something scary every day. So you are not in a rut. So if it's coming and talking to people like this, if that's scary, yesterday I tried kombucha, whatever. I can't even say it, scary fermented drink. Just do something scary every day so it reminds you that you're like alive and that your life has not been subsumed by work, okay? And also, the fourth thing, let life win the balance sometimes. So if it's that you feel you're always being work, take 3 months and let life win the battle. And those are my points.
Yeah. Any other comments? Last questions. Well, I hope you've at least begun to think about those decisions you have to make. I suspect some of this even applies to your graduate school education, and balance. But certainly, as you begin to enter the academic field, these are conscious decisions to think about. Add those to your list of things to consider as you look for your first job. Thank you for attending, and we'd appreciate the evaluation.